Hello and welcome back to another video. As is the standard at this point, I think the time between my videos is actually growing exponentially, but Besiege recently came out with a new DLC called the Splintered Sea that looked interesting, so I figured I'd give it a shot. If you've never played Besiege before, it's a game about building sort of medieval creations to accomplish specific tasks. This recent DLC focuses on water-based creations like boats and submarines. The goal of this first level is simple enough: to destroy the house that sits on this rock. Why is there an uninhabited house on a rock in the middle of the ocean? That's a good question. Having not played Besiege in, well, probably 7 years, I initially just wanted to get the basics down. I placed down some blocks and tried to get a creation moved around using these fans. After quickly realizing that these fans were not that powerful, I discovered a very similar block called the aquatic screw that the DLC added that's specifically designed for moving underwater, which understandably worked a lot better. After completing this first level with a block of wood and a screw, I thought it might be interesting to try completing these levels with as few blocks as possible, and this one was completable with only 2. The next level is already a little more complicated, requiring you to destroy 2 of these boats. Not something I'm able to do with this simple screw mechanism. Sticking with the idea of simplicity, I thought that maybe I could just use 2 screws and sort of vector myself enough to hit the boats. While I do think this is technically possible, it certainly is beyond my capabilities. I tried a lot of different things here, really just exploring how the mechanics of the water work. This level was simple enough, I thought maybe I could just use a screw and a rudder, but that didn't really work either for obvious reasons. Next, I thought that maybe I could basically make an underwater plane, but the rudders kept acting really weird, and I think that maybe they have a little bit of thrust because they kept pushing me in directions I didn't want to go. I played with this design too, using a more standard tail fin. This worked pretty well and moved in a pretty cool way, but didn't give me nearly enough control. Eventually I combined this tail fin with my initial design, and it was just enough to complete the level. It did help that the boat in the background just exploded for some reason too. Due to my own stubbornness, this next level took me quite a while longer. I really wanted to complete the level in as few blocks as possible, and that definitely added a level of complexity. In this level, you had to go around this pile of bones and destroy the big ship behind it. I tried for a little while to get some variation of the last level's creation to work, but I couldn't even successfully navigate around the bones, let alone destroy the ship. Trying something different, I moved on to trying to use multiple screws to turn and added this big wing to try to keep me a little more stable. This definitely added a lot of stability, but didn't help me navigate at all. After complaining the whole time that there were no adjustable ballasts to change my buoyancy, I found that there were adjustable ballasts to change my buoyancy called barrels, which made it much easier to control. Still needed some work though. For the first time, I was actually able to navigate over to the ship, though I was still figuring out exactly how the barrels worked and the turning needed some work. After that, it was just a matter of figuring out how I could actually do any damage to the ship. Having not played in a while, I had no idea what weapons could actually do that, so I started the only way I knew how, with explosives. Which was immediately top heavy, so I figured out how to flip it upside down. It is only now in editing that I realized this is why my turning was reversed the entire time. This was actually almost promising, with me doing this really cool barrel roll that almost hit the ship on the first try. Except it didn't, and I couldn't get this to work at all, so I moved on to another design entirely. Which was far worse, so I started from scratch, trying not to limit myself to just using small creations. This time I wanted to try a more standard medieval style ship, so I put down some curved pieces to make the hull, and then decided it was actually a submarine. I sealed up the ends, added some screws to the back for thrust, a rudder, and some barrels to the sides to keep it upright. Looking at it now, I think I could have made this work with some proper balancing to get it neutrally buoyant, but I didn't know that at the time, so I went ahead and scrapped this one pretty quickly. After that, I spent quite a while iterating on a design I thought could work, which at its core was just 2 screws, a rudder, and some ballasts and barrels for height control. With a bomb strapped to the front, of course. It wasn't a speedy finish by any stretch of the imagination, but it got me there in the end. I also want to comment here on how annoying the camera controls are when you're in the water. It doesn't rotate automatically with creation, and if your ship is on the surface and you want to see in front of you, your camera is intermittently obstructed by waves. It isn't a deal breaker, and it's solved a little by adding a camera block, but I apologize for the poor camera work if you notice it. Anyway, the next few levels felt oddly simple after that one. Makes me wonder if I misunderstood it, because all I did was remove the bomb and fix my steering, and then I drove in a straight line. I did go back and try to simplify this one as much as possible though, and it too was doable in just 2 blocks. Weirdly simple. The next level was a tad bit more hands-on, requiring you to navigate some underwater rocks with a few twists and turns. It was still completable with my initial creation though, but not elegantly. I did follow this up by creating a smaller vehicle now that I had some more experience and understood how the barrels worked, not 2 blocks this time though. The level after this one was one of the more interesting ones in my opinion. Instead of get to a point or destroy this, you had to find a way to extinguish the flame atop this large tower. Initially, I had no ideas on how to do this. I could create a flying creation with a water cannon, but that didn't really feel like it was in the spirit of the DLC. I found this part added by the DLC called the harpoon launcher though, which acts like a grappling hook, allowing you to shoot something and pull yourself in. I thought I would be able to pull my ship up to the beacon and extinguish it from there. Right as I reset though, I realized that if I had just let the torch fall into the water, that would have extinguished it. To try that again, I removed everything but the harpoon cannon and timed it to hit the torch and get caught on some underwater debris to pull it down. This worked pretty much perfectly, and again, I completed it with only 2 blocks. I'm noticing a trend. I'll be honest in saying that I made this next level incredibly boring, which is why I regret doing the minimum blocks challenge. The task here is to kill 90% of the sailors in these boats while they fire arrows at you. These little boats can be destroyed by just a small collision, so as long as they contain 90% of the sailors, which they do, this level is completable with the minimal sub I made earlier. It took like 10 minutes and about 7 tries, but that is exactly how I completed it. So far, I've tried to show the full completion runs for each level, but I'm not even going to bother here because the amount of bobbing up and down, waves in the face, and swerving left and right makes me seasick, so here's the abridged version. In the end, I didn't need to destroy every ship anyway, so I called it there and moved on. Okay, thank God, 8 blocks used. I could have done it in fewer, but I don't have the sanity for that. The next level was Razor Tooth Cave, which is another interesting one. You have to take the chest from the mouth of this big stone shark and deposit it off to the side. This one is made particularly difficult by the small amount of space in the shark's mouth, as well as the surrounding sharks that want to destroy your creation. At first I thought I could just take this simple sub again and ram the chest, but I wasn't sure how heavy it was. This method also proved complicated as it was quite difficult to line up a hit on the chest with any kind of consistency. I tweaked some settings and tried this a few times. Each time I just ended up too low and bouncing off, or too high and getting stuck with the sharks. I did come very close this time and I knocked it out and came around a few times to nudge it closer, but I ended up not quite able to get it there. After that wasn't working, I thought it might be possible to swim in above the chest and attach to it with one of these grabbers. Putting the grabber on the very bottom also proved hard to balance, so I moved it to the tail. This showed a bit of promise, and I was able to get in and attach to it, but if I came in from the front I got stuck immediately, and coming in from the side was having the same alignment issues as before. Get it, get it, get it! Did I get it? I don't think I got it. Oh, I was so close though. Editing these, I'm realizing how much time I spent on these levels just banging my head against a wall, hoping something would change. Huh. Anyway, I eventually did try something different though. Thinking about other ways to attach to the chest, I remember the harpoon launcher, which makes a lot more sense for this level so I don't have to get close to the sharks. In order to get more momentum, it made sense to put the harpoon launcher facing backwards so I could swim away from it instead of awkwardly to the side. It looked like how you'd expect a fish tied to a chest to look, but it got there well enough. The penultimate level, Jurassiker's Bastille, had an interesting mechanic where you had to turn the gear to raise the gate and let the giant squid through. I had 2 ideas of how I wanted to do this one pretty much immediately, and the first was to do it the same way as the previous level, through lots of trial and error with the harpoon launcher. As with every level before, I tried far too many times to do something that clearly wouldn't work well even if I got it, by swimming out to the right side and trying to catch the gear behind me. I think this phrase sums up my thinking clearly. Okay, that's dumb. But if I could get it to work... After 23 attempts, this was the closest I got, and I decided I wanted it done before the heat death of the universe, so I decided to move on. My next idea was to create a sort of rotating claw using the aquatic screws as propulsion. I started by adding some grabbers to the front as well as some screws to the back. I spent a little while trying to make it perfectly balanced by adjusting some barrels and ballasts, during which I found a mode that shows the center of buoyancy and mass, though they didn't work the way I expected them to, so I ended up just ignoring them. I had a good idea here to create a sort of tank-style steering mechanism using two screws as well. I can trigger the one on the left and the one on the right separately, allowing me to steer very quickly in vector with only two buttons. It took a few attempts to get it lined up, and depth perception was a bit of a problem, but it worked pretty much how I wanted it to. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see how fast I could spin it, so I enabled free build mode and put as much thrust as I could. This is also where I discovered advanced build mode, which allows you to mirror your build, among other neat features. The final level is Salt Rock Fortress, whose only objective is to destroy 70% of everything. This seems super simple, but boy was I underprepared. This level was particularly difficult for a few reasons, not the least of which I just had no idea what to do. There's a lot of stuff on the land behind brick walls, which implies you need projectiles. However, the only projectiles available that could reasonably destroy the big ship and the land were cannonballs, and each cannon can only be fired one time. As you can see, my initial attempt was to create a more standard ship with cannons on both sides. I also had to add barrels around the perimeter to prevent it from flipping. I can argue that this looked really cool, but it wasn't really useful. The cannons were almost impossible to aim on the choppy waters, and though I'm sure if I got lucky I could make it work, it was just annoying. I spawned in my original bomb boat to see if I could at least destroy the big ship, but that wasn't really possible without also destroying myself, even if I put it on a big stick. I tried a bunch of random other stuff too, ending up here at some point as a parasite attached to the big ship. I thought maybe if I lived long enough they would destroy each other, which also almost worked. I tried attaching a drill to my boat at some point too, thinking if I could at least destroy the big ship that would be a decent percent of the total needed, only for the drill to rake off on contact. As a side note, I feel like if a boat goes over your island like this, something should break either on the island or the boat. I added wheels to the boat to try to drive up on the land and use the drill to destroy it that way, but I was never even able to get fully up out of the water due to the slope of the beach and constantly being bombarded with cannonballs. I definitely can't blame the game on this one though, because this clearly wasn't intended. I was just out of ideas. There were more iterations of these ideas too, like adding shrapnel cannons to the big boat, which was probably the closest I ever got to doing it the intended way. Okay, that was pretty satisfying, I have to admit on that. I'll skip over another 30 minutes of nothing and just say that after an hour and a half of this level, I got tired of it and just brute forced it by dropping bombs from the sky. I'm not going to say I'm proud of this solution, but it was all I could come up with at the time, and it's definitely a legitimate solution, it just feels a little cheaty because it avoids using any of the new functionality. It was fun to get revenge on those little digital men, though. Anyway, that was Besiege, the Splintered Sea. Overall, it was a lot of fun and the mechanics were very well fleshed out, but the camera controls and lack of sea-specific weapons made it a little annoying at times. You can leave the video now. The rest of this is just updates from me while I have fun building a fast submarine in the background. Thank you for watching, and no promises there won't be another long delay. If you were wondering where I've been very busy. I'm working full-time while going to college full-time, and it's been a pretty full plate. I did just finish my bachelor's degree in computer science though, and I start my master's in the fall. I just got my first pet in a few years though, a little kitten named Leo. Another thing that takes time, but he's been wonderful so far. I have probably 7 unfinished videos too, like 60 hours of footage. Projects that I either lost interest in, didn't think I had enough content to be entertaining, or just never finished. I really enjoy YouTube, but I try to do high quality and that can take more focus than I can give at times. Anyway, I really enjoyed playing Besiege here, namely this last part, just building a fun submarine with no specific goal. So please let me know if you have any more ideas like this. I might have some time this summer to do more videos, but I'll have to see how tight summer classes are. Thank you so much for sticking around, sorry for the lack of content, and goodbye.